Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 21st of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today with Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And from Damascus, Vanessa Beeley is joining us as well. Now, we're going to get kicked off today, Charles, with yacht sinkings and other coincidences.
Yes, we are. Good afternoon, all. Yes, this is the news that within very close proximity to each other, two co-defendants of a case that's just been to trial in America have respectively been killed and gone missing. On the left, we see the BBC reporting the death of Stephen Chamberlain, formerly of Autonomy and then Invoke Capital and associated with Darktrace, which we're going to come on to talk about, hit by a car in Cambridgeshire on Saturday. And then on Monday, the yacht belonging to Mike Lynch was reportedly overturned in a harbour off Sicily. Also on board, Jonathan Bloomer of Morgan Stanley and their solicitor, Christopher Morvillo. Now, of course, at first sight, this does seem like a coincidence beyond credibility, but what it does do is to shine a spotlight on not just the court case that had closed, but also the other activities that they respectively had been involved with. So if we go back to the court case itself, which concerned the suggestion that there had been a fraudulent inflation of the price of Autonomy, which was founded by Lynch, and indeed Chamberlain worked there at the company with him. It was sold to Hewlett-Packard, and the fraud allegation has just been quashed, in effect, by a federal court in San Francisco. So the sort of celebration aboard the yacht named Bayesian, which of course is worth mentioning because it refers to a statistical branch of mathematics predicting future outcomes on past events, in effect. But this is giving us a further look at what they did with the proceeds of the sale of Autonomy to Hewlett-Packard, which was to put the money into a company called Invoke Capital, with which they were able to set up other businesses. And I should just draw your attention to what it says on the front page of their website, which is that Invoke exists to realise the commercial possibilities of Britain's extraordinary science and deep technology base. So commercial possibilities are the critical part of this entire story, it would seem. So with funding from Invoke Capital, a cybersecurity company called Darktrace was set up in 2013. The headline there from the Darktrace website: Invoke Capital makes first investment in fundamental cybersecurity technology. Now, it wasn't terribly long after, at least this is the first sort of report of it on the Darktrace website, that the UK government signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Darktrace. Now, interestingly, the UK government is quite quiet about this. Very difficult to find any reference to Darktrace specifically on the government website, but nonetheless, it's going back a tiny bit to 2016. There was an award, a Queen's Award, given to Darktrace for what's described as their enterprise immune system. So just to get into the nuts and bolts of what Darktrace actually does, or at least says that it's capable of, and it concerns what's called pattern of life. So it concerns artificial intelligence. So it says it's powered by AI algorithms, and the enterprise immune system works by learning the pattern of life of each user and device across the entire digital infrastructure. Using this evolving understanding of normal, Darktrace spots emerging threats and autonomously responds to in-progress attacks before they do damage. But of course, we have to consider the type of threat and the type of damage. Are we talking about threat to government and population or corporate interests? And this is the line that we need to understand better. They go on to say that it's powered by machine learning and mathematics, and it was developed by specialists from the University of Cambridge and intelligence from former MI5 and GCHQ experts. Darktrace's self-learning technology is able to monitor network activity and detect threats as they develop, which helps companies get ahead of the threats. Now, of course, with a capability like that, it's no great surprise that they go on to say that some of the world's largest corporations rely on Darktrace's self-learning technology in sectors including energy and utilities, financial services, telecommunications, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and transportation. So, of course, with all of this in mind, first of all, Darktrace seems to be suggesting that they can predict outcomes based on their monitoring and surveillance of people and the way that they use devices in particular. Now, should we be concerned, therefore, that this is an arrangement that government have gone into specifically because, of course, Invoke Capital, which has funded Darktrace and indeed has involved Lynch and Stephen Chamberlain, has, of course, declared that their chief concern here are the commercial possibilities for the organisation. Now, the other connection that I want to draw your attention to is that Darktrace describes CrowdStrike as being a Darktrace technology partner. And of course, CrowdStrike was responsible, shall we say, for an enormous IT outage recently due to an update, or at least so the story goes, an update that in fact brought several technologies to a standstill. But they say that they stop breaches, they power productivity, technology, intelligence and expertise come together in our industry-leading CrowdStrike Falcon platform to deliver security that works. And then we look at the government website. Of course, the government, in effect, selling CrowdStrike products there. We can see that's £120 for a virtual machine on what they're calling their Falcon platform. So the CrowdStrike, of course, partnered with Darktrace, which is funded by an organisation that specifically is set up to further commercial interests or commercial possibilities. And now we look at who's actually involved with Darktrace, of course, apart from Lynch himself and Chamberlain, who had come from Autonomy and Invoke Capital. But we see, first of all, in terms of sort of profile, Jonathan Evans, and we look at his background, former Director General of MI5, where he spent 33 years focusing on internal and domestic counterterrorism and cyber threats. And this is very much a pattern, one might say. We've also got the ex-CIA official Alan Wade, who is described as being the chief information officer of the CIA, who's joined the board of advisors. Now, this has been written about in the past by Declassified UK in an article back from 2020 saying how Britain's profiteering spy masters ignored the country's biggest threats like coronavirus and endangered the public. Now, they're not actually suggesting that coronavirus was the country's biggest threat. The point they're making is that the government was talking about it as though it was the biggest threat, and yet they weren't dealing with it in the same way that they were other things. So the key phrase from the declassified article is revolving door. And they go on to say that the revolving door between government and industry is meant to be regulated for conflicts of interest by the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. However, Declassified can find no evidence that an intelligence chief has ever had an ACOBA application rejected. This allows them to lobby their old agencies on behalf of their private interests after they leave office. So we'll just have a look at the detail of that. Specifically, we've talked about Jonathan Evans. So the letter that concerned his appointment back from 2013 said that it was approved on a dual condition, that he should not draw on privileged information available to him from his time in Crown service. They felt it was especially pertinent in this case, given the sensitive nature of his job, and also the need to avoid the perception that Darktrace was gaining an unfair advantage due to it. And then also from 2 years from his last day of service, he should not become personally involved in lobbying the UK government on behalf of his new employer, and they go on to say its parent company or its clients. So the accidents that have befallen these two men have either by design or not, brought into the public domain now an awful lot of information. There's still going to need to be picked through in some considerable detail to see exactly, first of all, what has happened to them, how it did happen. I mean, it does seem coincidence, absolutely, as I said at the outset, beyond credibility. There will be all sorts of wild speculations, one shouldn't doubt. But really, to examine the relationship between government and corporation and where those relationships overlap in terms of a united desire to pursue civilian populations by means of monitoring and surveillance in order to predict behaviour and therefore control it. So there's an awful lot more that's going to come out of this story, one imagines.
Indeed. And Vanessa, once again, it highlights the very tight links between cybersecurity, companies and intelligence agencies. And we've been highlighting connections to Unit 8200 with so many of these. But it's not just Israeli intelligence, it's other Western intelligence agencies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, that's a very important aspect of what we're talking about to keep an eye on for the future. But today I wanted, because there's a lot of conversations going on about the threat of nuclear escalation between Russia and NATO. But in my view, everyone's rather ignoring the very real threat of Israel's Samson option and its nuclear capability, which has been kept very under wraps, as many people describe it, sort of basement nuclear capability. So this is from the Strategic Vision Institute, Deconstructing Israel's Samson Option and what it means. So the Samson option can be employed in case conventional deterrence fails. The CIA believed as early as 1976 the Israelis had stockpiled 10 to 20 nuclear weapons. By 2002, it was estimated that the stockpile number had increased to more than 75. In 2006, George W. Bush's Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, admitted in a Senate hearing that Israel has nuclear weapons, and 2 years later, former US President Jimmy Carter also said that the number of Israeli nuclear warheads is more than 150. That number is now considered to be much higher. Those testimonies by senior US officials establish the fact that Israel does possess nuclear weapon capability. So what does this actually mean? This is an article at progressive.com. Israeli nuclear ambiguity, its lack of official confirmation or denial. It's also not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it's the only country in the region or only state in the region that does possess nuclear weapons. But that secrecy persists to this day. Nevertheless, as of 2021, researchers estimate that the country possesses 90 nuclear warheads. These figures do change according to the reports, capable of being delivered by aircraft, land-based ballistic missiles, and sea-based cruise missiles. Israel is reserving these weapons for the Samson option, an all-out assault on the civilian population centers of its opponent, but also of its friends if under threat. So let's have a look at the next part of that article. It stands in contrast, the Samson option, to doctrines embraced by other nuclear powers, such as the Mutually Assured Destruction, MAD, developed during the Cold War. MAD posits that nuclear powers like the US and Soviet Union, or now Russia, could deter each other from ever using nuclear weapons through the threat of retaliatory strikes that would ensure mutual destruction. However, Israel doesn't adhere to this policy as it does in its defense policy generally. It believes in preemptive strikes. And so if we look at what that also entails, I mean, in the 80s, Mordecai Vanunu was given the Right Livelihood Award for his courage and self-sacrifice in revealing the extent of Israel's nuclear weapons. He was imprisoned for 18 years by Israel for treason. 11 of those years were spent in solitary confinement. And even though he was released in 2004, he basically is not allowed to talk to foreign journalists, and his movements are restricted. So this is a recent image in Israeli media of the Dimona nuclear power facility that has been targeted in the recent escalation. And if we look at what it says in the Jerusalem Post, this was in June of this year, Israel is upgrading its plutonium for its reactor at the nuclear research facility in Dimona. And basically, this is effectively admitting that Israel has nuclear warheads, but the IAEA, sorry, I always get that one mixed up, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has not to date been able to inspect those facilities. Now, what I want to point to, because in a sense, with the NATO-Russian conflict, we're dealing with, particularly from the Russian side, a degree of rationale. This is an article in the Cradle saying Israel isn't crazy, crazy, it's just mad, M-A-D, and that doesn't mean mutually assured destruction, it means literally mad. So let's have a look at what they mean. Basically, what Israel is doing is presenting itself as like a rabid dog in its war policy. So I'm just going to read down the middle column. First, people are more likely to attack you if they see you as weak or vulnerable. Second, they cannot know for sure that you're weak. They depend on the signs that you give out through your behavior, both present and past. Hit them where you sense they may be vulnerable and make it hurt. Well, we're definitely seeing that in Israel's genocidal policy. You are not acting out emotionally. That is a sign of weakness. You're simply hinting that you are a little irrational and that your next move could be almost anything. So just relate this back to the Samson option. This reputation can be for any number of things, being difficult, stubborn, violent, ruthlessly efficient. You must build your reputation carefully, allowing no inconsistencies. Instead of threatening your opponents openly, you take action that is indirect and designed to make them think. And I would also point out that in 2003, Ariel Sharon said that we possess several hundred atomic warheads and can launch them in all directions, perhaps even at Rome. Most EU capitals are targets for our Air Force. We have the capability to take the world down with us, and I assure you that will happen before Israel goes under. So this is coming back to the threat of the Samson option that can even be directed at what would be considered friendly nations. And not forgetting that since October the 7th, it was the heritage minister who was suspended after calling for the nuking of Gaza as being an option. And more recently, the ambassador at the UN, Gilad Erdan, who's outgoing, in his final speech said that the UN building should be wiped off the face of the earth, that it was a twisted and distorted institution, which I would agree with to some extent, but not for the same reasons as he does. And then finally, I think 65% of Israeli Jews oppose criminal prosecution for soldiers suspected of raping Palestinian detainees. So we're looking at a very unstable, deliberately irrational nation with the potential of preemptive nuclear strikes.
Okay, thank you for that, Vanessa. Now, let's come back to the UK and censorship, perhaps a bit more than that. Richard Medhurst put this tweet out a couple of days ago, talking about his arrest under the Terrorism Act because of his reporting. Now, we have a little bit of video from this. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
On Thursday, as I landed in London Heathrow Airport, I was immediately escorted off the plane by 6 police officers who were waiting for me at the entrance of the aircraft. They arrested me, not detained, they arrested me under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act of 2000 and accused me of allegedly, quote, expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization, unquote, but wouldn't explain what this meant. So I was taken to an adjacent room, patted down, my phone confiscated. I was not allowed to inform my family. Despite being calm and cooperative, I was handcuffed with something that placed my shoulders in an awkward position and my wrists on top of rather than next to each other. The handcuffs were extremely tight. Despite the police loosening them, they left marks on me for 2 days. They searched me again for the second time within 10 minutes. I was told to sit on a bench, remove my shoes, remove my socks. I was told to turn my socks inside out and hold them up for the officers to inspect. They also made me hold up my feet so they could check them as well. The officers took me to a room with UV lights, which they told me is used to catch burglars who are sprayed with something. I have no idea why they did this since they just removed me off of a plane. My suitcase was then opened in the lobby and ransacked. All of my journalistic equipment and devices were seized, including phones, SIM cards, wireless microphones, headphones, even my shoelaces. They later took my DNA as well, my fingerprints, palm prints, and photographed me. I was placed in solitary confinement in a cold cell that smelt like urine.
Now, there's quite a bit more in that video clip, so I do suggest everybody goes and watches the full clip. But he was talking about being arrested, Charles, under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act 2000. Let's bring this on screen and just have a look at the government summary of this. Section 12 of TAC 2000 makes it an offence to invite support for a prescribed organisation, express an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organisation, or to arrange or manage or assist in arranging or managing a meeting in support of a prescribed organisation. Now, I guess in this case, the situation is the prescribed organisation is Hamas. But I mean, what were your thoughts based on the clip of how this was handled? Was an arrest appropriate, for example?
I mean, it's very hard to say, but it's certainly what did happen to him, having been arrested, does highlight the ability with which police can run a sort of domino rally of events. So if their goal is to find certain bits of information or indeed articles, he talked about having his journalistic equipment kind of look through and whatnot, then the arrest is the unlocking device. That sets the chain in motion. So I think that's the critical thing here. And like so much this legislation that's been designed over the last sort of 50 years, it specifically enables this interpretation, which makes it almost impossible not to have the power of arrest in these sorts of situations. So I think that's the thing. It's just the way in which it's written up. It makes it too easy for police to do that. But certainly, what he's describing of being in custody, that I'm afraid is standard. That's not related to terrorism.
Okay, and Vanessa, when similar happened to you, of course, you were held for not quite as long. Sorry, if we just put the graphic on screen here, please, Stephanie, and we just look, because you were held under Schedule 7, which is kind of an addendum to the main act itself, which gives pretty unique powers to the British government to examine people without needing to arrest them first. So that's a different thing. But what I really wanted to get your thoughts on were what you thought about the issue of having an opinion about a prescribed organisation.
Having an opinion is that it's about who is prescribing them as a terrorist organisation. But if, as a journalist, it's your job basically to talk about prescribed organisations in any particular conflict or arena. And to a degree, that's what Richard is doing. As a journalist, it's what all of us do. So, are we talking about the conflict here in the Middle East going to be accused of promoting a prescribed organisation while the BBC can come to Idlib and sit down for tea with a prescribed organisation, Al-Qaeda, or with ISIS affiliates, and get away with it scot-free? I'm sure they're not stopped as they come into Heathrow.
Indeed.
I think the brief point to make just following that is the absurdity of the date of the prescription. Hamas in this country was only prescribed in November 2021. So, of course, had he said or done anything that encompassed expressing support for Hamas prior to that, no one would be able to touch him. And the reason that date's significant is that in the United States, the similar condition, I think, goes back to 1997 or 98. So it is, like we see with all these things, it's the United Kingdom sort of pushing the edge of the envelope in order to be able to, in effect, capture people that it feels like it wants to capture.
I think the thing that concerns me most about this is who decides what the line is, this line that gets drawn affects what people say, what they're able to say. We're seeing this line being pushed ever further towards prescribing anybody from saying anything which is in any way critical of government policy. I think this is extremely dangerous. We'll talk about this much more in Extra, I'm sure. Now, if you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. £5 a month is what we're asking for a membership, and your membership very much needed, very much appreciated. So thank you to everybody that is a member. If you can't do that, at least we ask that you share our material and become the algorithm for us, because so many organizations are wiping us out. We're back on the new YouTube channel after a week's ban for so-called medical misinformation. We don't expect that this channel is going to last very much longer, frankly, but we're just we're just experimenting with YouTube a little bit. We'll see what happens, and maybe we'll have more to say on that in the not too distant future. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop. There are a number of items there. Please do that if you possibly can, especially Your Life in Their Hands. There's still copies of that available. Please do that, or pick up a ticket for the event on the 19th of October 2024. We were very delighted to have Bob Moran visiting us yesterday at UK Column Towers here, and he will be at this event on the 19th, as will many others. We'll name more names very, very shortly. Now, the interview that Alex did with Calistrat Marvin Atadori, if I've pronounced that name correctly, is now on the website. Please do watch this. It got a very good response in the chat box yesterday. I think everybody enjoyed it, so do watch this. And then tomorrow, an interview with Kevin Lister.
Kevin raised safeguarding concerns in his capacity as a teacher at a college in Swindon, but these were concerns about a student of his that was wanting to be referred to by a different name and to be considered to be a boy rather than a girl. And Kevin's life has been systematically dismantled as a result of challenging the transgender agenda. I really would encourage you to listen to this, especially if you're a parent or in any way involved with education.
So that goes out at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Join us for that. On Sunday, September the 8th, the International Centre for 9/11 Justice and UK Column will be holding a symposium on entitled Aviation Impossibilities, Deconstructing the Official Story of the 9/11 Hijackings and Air Defence Failures. Ted Walter, Olivier Karam-Mason, Aidan Monaghan and Kevin Ryan will be speaking. Piers Robinson will be hosting. So that begins at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And join us for that if you possibly can, September the 8th. Katie Joe's and Hope Sussex Freedom Music Festival, another reminder for that, 23rd to the 26th of August. Get to that if you possibly can. Finally...
Yeah, taking control of your own food supply, such a critical part of life these days. The Attack on Food and Farmers Symposium, 6th and 7th of September. It's going to be hosted by Children's Health Defence at chd.tv/events. And there are some very, very good and knowledgeable speakers. So I would advise that you tune in to that.
Also, Brian and I will be speaking at the Heritage Party Conference on the 20th of September. Details on screen and in the show notes.
And then in November of this year in London, there's going to be a Died Suddenly art exhibition, which is to put the spotlight on the excess deaths that have not been sufficiently explained or given attention by the government. If you're able to help with that, or you would like to know more about it, get in touch with Jake Fern at jakehfern@yahoo.co.uk.
Okay, so lots going on at the moment. I hope everybody will find something in that lot now. So perhaps you'll find this interesting because, of course, we all clapped for the NHS. We now all need to clap for Ukraine. This is a new campaign being run through the Ministry of Defence and others for Ukrainian Independence Day. So I'm sorry, I'm going to impose this little piece of video on you. I appreciate it's lunchtime and that may have made you feel physically ill, but let's just, they have produced a whole document, a whole PDF document giving advice on how to take advantage of this whole thing. So they provide sample social media graphics, they provide sample social media posts for you. They provide a hashtag that we don't have to think, we just have to do. So just as with the NHS, Charles, we need to be out there banging our pots for Ukraine. It's great stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let's move quickly on to more serious things, and space.
Yeah, space, which we will focus on quite a bit today and have done over the last few months, because, of course, space is now becoming very much an integral part not only of defence, but also of the overlap between defence, corporate interests, weather modification, surveillance, and so many other things besides. So we've got UK Space Command announcing that a satellite, the Tyche satellite, was sent into space as part of programme Istari. Now, as with so many things in this age, the names are always rehashed. They're seldom anything to do with British culture. So it's just worth pointing out here that in Greek religion, Tyche is the goddess of chance, with whom the Roman Fortuna was later identified, a capricious dispenser of good and ill fortune. I thought that was a bit odd. But anyway, capricious dispenser. I just want to highlight this, as the conflict in Ukraine has shown. So the government, Ministry of Defence here, and equipment and support, just using whichever sort of sweet spot or emergency that they can. Here, of course, we've got the conflict in Ukraine, but they're talking about it being the first satellite to be launched under the Ministry of Defence's space-based Istari programme, which will deliver a constellation of satellites and supporting ground systems by 2031. So this is under the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance function. But what I really want to draw your attention to with this slide is that the MOD are claiming to have complete ownership of this. They are making out that this is entirely their project. But we should also be very mindful of the fact that they say it will contribute to other government tasks. And they don't list those, but look at what it is able to do, to include natural disaster monitoring, development of mapping information, environmental monitoring and tracking, I've highlighted. Effectively, it's an eye in the sky, low orbit, and it is specifically tasked with capturing daylight imagery. We have a little, sorry, on back there.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a very short video of it. Here we go.
No, sorry.
Okay, never mind. It's gone, but it was part of the Defence Space Strategy, which goes back to February 2022, which was reported on very comprehensively by UK Column at the time. But it's part of a 1.4 billion investment. And again, there's going to be a network of these satellites. But again, here we see the same terminology to support greater global surveillance and intelligence for military operations. But what sort of military operations? But the science inside gives us a bit more of an answer to that, which of course is where this does come from DSTL, the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory 2022. And this is the very opening phrase in that publication. We live in times of increasing volatility and uncertainty. The threats we face today, both at home and abroad, are more complex and dynamic than ever before. So we're looking at surveillance, tracking, monitoring and military operations, and we're talking about threats at home. So I will leave you to draw your own conclusions, but I think that sends quite a clear message of where this is going. They also point out their science and technology capabilities, and it's just worth noting how many of those relate to human behaviours. We've got AI and data science, communications and networks, cyber, homeland security and CT systems, counterterrorism, human and social sciences, information systems, operational research and sensing. So it does look very much like space here, a chapter within this publication, is being used as yet another means of surveilling the population. But the critical part comes out here when I talk about the MOD claiming to have ownership. They say that they will provide a test platform for sophisticated imaging and monitoring radio signals, including GPS. Well, think about GPS in this day and age. Everybody carries a GPS tracking device with them all the time, paving the way for a more collaborative and connected space communication system with our combat allies. Well, who exactly are they? Because, of course, the bit that wasn't mentioned initially was that this was only put into low orbit by Elon Musk's SpaceX. So, in fact, is it owned by the Ministry of Defence or not? And, well, let's just have a look at Mint Press News here, speculating, admittedly, but they say that Elon Musk stopped Ukraine from striking the Russian Navy by switching off Starlink. So when you think that the UK's defence, what's called a defence capability, is in effect put into orbit by somebody who owns a company privately. And then we see on the right, of course, Musk having a very friendly conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. It's perfectly reasonable to ask questions of the judgment of the government and the Ministry of Defense. So there we go. SpaceX valued at 210 billion, but as I say, it's at the moment a privately owned company. Now, some slides that I've talked about in the past, just to highlight this. So SpaceX here broadcasting that they provide secure satellite comms networks for government entities, but of course a spin-off of this, or part of it, is what they call Starshield, which they say supports national security. But whose national security? And again, Starlink, which is in effect part of the same stable, is not possible to use in Russia, China, Belarus, Afghanistan, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Syria, or Iran. So it just goes to show how any of these engagements that have gone into, they're spoken about as though we own them. We absolutely don't. We are totally at the behest of corporations, and in this case, individuals like Elon Musk, which from a defense point of view seems an absolutely absurd position to enter into.
So if that's space warfare in the UK, what's happening in the United States? Well, just recently they have held a conference. Here it is, Space and Mission Defense Symposium. Well, I just thought it was quite amusing that their titanium patron was Boeing, since Boeing not only doesn't seem to be able to manufacture aircraft that don't crash at the moment, but don't seem to be able to manufacture spacecraft that are capable of bringing anything back from the International Space Station, because their capsule is currently stuck up there at the moment. But anyway, this symposium featured this gentleman. This is General Stephen Whiting, who's head of Spacecom in the United States. And he was talking about their latest list of requirements. The latest on the list, or the top of the list at the moment, is a requirement for what they're describing as space fires. Now, this is pretty undefined at the moment. It has been used several times over the years by Space Command, but they haven't really defined it to enable them to establish space superiority. So this is what he said: missile defeat effects will significantly enhance our ability to defeat trans-regional ballistic cruise and hypersonics missile threats, as well as air-launched to ground-launched direct ascent threats. But he said that these involve new and innovative approaches across all domains, which evolve beyond point solutions and one versus one missile interceptors. So to translate that a little bit, that seems to be suggesting, Charles, that they are looking perhaps at electromagnetic effects, where they can affect multiple warheads or multiple weapon systems at a time, rather than attempting to shoot things down directly.
Yeah, I think that'd be exactly right, which of course begs the question, if it can be done there, it can certainly be done elsewhere, but will it be?
Indeed. So if we bring him back on, then he went on to say this: dynamic space operations is based on the idea that in a future fight, some of our assets in space must be able to do what our terrestrial assets do all the time: maneuver and sustain themselves. Doing so will allow our space-based capabilities to execute their mission until the objectives are met, not until they run out of the gas they launched with. And so the question is, what is this power source going to be that is going to survive until the mission is complete? And the only thing that I can think of would be some kind of nuclear power source. Whether they're actually intending to use nuclear power in space remains to be seen. The other question of whether they're actually talking about any kind of kinetic weaponry in space is also remains to be seen. At this point, they're still denying that, but the use of the word fire in this remains undefined, and we have to wait and see where that actually goes. But clearly, space, both in the UK and in the United States, being ramped up as a domain to be played with. And then just finally on this, the Army Space Vision supporting multi-domain operations was published a couple of months ago, and I just wanted to highlight one paragraph from this, that they intend to interdict adversary space capabilities by delivering necessary fires and effects at echelon to protect friendly forces from observation and targeting by counter-satellite communications, counter-surveillance and reconnaissance, and navigation warfare operations. And again, to translate that a little bit, it's a bit unclear whether interdict means blow up, but certainly they certainly mean to disrupt the ability of so-called enemies from observing them or their so-called allies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant word, because in effect, delay, destroy, disrupt, any of those. Could do.
Okay, Vanessa, let's come back to you then, and the Middle East. And of course, we have a so-called ceasefire plan in the offing.
Yes, something that is developing really into what I described recently on X as being a sadistic farce designed really to enable the continuation of the genocide. So this was the BBC News after the most recent so-called ceasefire negotiations in Doha in Qatar. Of course, Hamas had refused to actually send anyone to negotiate because, as they described it, it was a waste of time. And Israel was continuously putting a spanner in the works. So the BBC runs with the headline, Israel accepts the bridging proposal for the ceasefire deal, says Antony Blinken. And then let's have a look at a few other headlines going from basically May this year until this week. Blinken calls on Hamas to accept ceasefire agreement. They should take it. Blinken says Netanyahu reaffirmed commitment to Gaza ceasefire plan. Blinken says Israel agrees to a US-backed proposal for a ceasefire. Is anyone noticing the pattern here that it's Blinken that's constantly saying that Israel is accepting? And this is Elon Mizrahi on X. Did you notice this pattern where Blinken always announces on Netanyahu's behalf that Netanyahu agreed to the deal, but Netanyahu never says so himself? Did you notice how this time around, as in previous fake negotiations, Netanyahu never goes on record to say that he agreed to any deal? You know why this is? It's because Blinken is committed to Netanyahu's political standing among Jewish right-wingers, and agreeing to any deal would make Netanyahu look weak to them. So at the service of Netanyahu's image and the genocide, Blinken just bluffs with offers specifically tailored to be unacceptable to Hamas, and lies that Netanyahu accepted them, knowing full well that Netanyahu will never have to live up to any deal, because Blinken makes sure that no deal will happen, while making sure the lie of Hamas inflexibility will become the official narrative. And of course, that's exactly what has happened. And in the last few days, Hamas again has accused the US of buying time for Israel to continue its genocide. And if we just move on, so Netanyahu this time around again added new conditions to the ceasefire proposal. So again, he changed the actual proposal, remembering that Hamas had accepted the Blinken broker deal back in July and before that in May. So let's have a look at why Hamas rejects Israel's new conditions in Doha. As it says in the article, basically Netanyahu's new conditions put forward during talks in Doha, and again, Hamas were not present in Doha. Israel's new conditions include keeping troops inside Gaza along its border with Egypt. An informed source said that's now being confirmed, while Hamas demands a complete ceasefire, a complete withdrawal from the Strip, a normal return of the displaced, and a prisoner exchange deal without restrictions, because Netanyahu now has demanded veto rights for up to 100 of the prisoners to be exchanged. So in other words, Palestinian prisoners to be exchanged and returned to the Israeli hostages. Netanyahu is demanding the right to veto up to 100 of those prisoners. So then just moving on. So this is from Mouin Rabbani, again on X. So he goes through it. You can freeze frame and read it yourself. But basically, he says the same thing. The US presents an Israeli ceasefire, pushes it through the UN Security Council. And then, contrary back in July to US and Israeli expectations, Hamas accepts the initiative. Israel responds by rejecting, adding new conditions to its own initiative designed to be rejected by Hamas. Under the guise of presenting a bridging proposal that would address the implementation of the original initiative, the US rewrites the initiative to incorporate the Israeli conditions presented after the UN Security Council endorsed and Hamas accepted the initiative. Hamas predictably rejects the new US document on the grounds that it's a different initiative, rather than a plan to implement the initiative it accepted. Amid much fanfare and lavish praise showered by Antony Blinken, Netanyahu accepts the revised initiative and then adds more changes to the initiative. So I think you can freeze frame and read it for yourself. but it becomes very clear that this is nothing more than a farce and a very sadistic one. And I just want to show Blinken, in part of his press conference, the area where he talks about the importance of the ceasefire.
Know is this: with every passing day that there's not an agreement, two things can happen. One is, of course, more hostages can perish, and second, intervening events come along that may make things even more difficult, if not impossible. And we've experienced that throughout this process. So there's the fierce urgency of now. That's what I think we're all feeling. And we do see this as the best opportunity to finally get this over the finish line. We'll never give up on it, but the challenge is, the longer this goes on, the more, again, hostages will suffer and possibly perish, and the more other things happen that could make things impossible. So that's why we're so intensely focused on getting this done and getting it done now.
Quite extraordinary. There is absolutely no mention of the continuing genocide and slaughter of Palestinians in that statement. And in fact, since Blinken's visit, this is what always happens. Israel has actually escalated yet again, attacking Lebanon's Bekaa, which is in the northeast, nowhere near the southern areas which have been targeted. They attack Bekaa, wounding 5 children under the age of 8 and killing 1. And multiple massacres since Blinken's visit in Gaza itself, including the wounding of 1 Palestinian journalist and the killing of another, taking the number of murdered journalists up to around 170 now. And a video I'm just going to show in Khan Yunis of how the quadcopters are used to randomly fire on civilians. This is in a crowded refugee area. And this is happening on an almost hourly basis. Israeli jets hit another Gaza school, killing at least 12. That number is now rising to around 20. And I just wanted to show these 2 maps side by side, which were produced by the UN Satellite Center, and I think it was back in July. And on the left, you can see the bombardment of residential areas of Gaza. I mean, virtually all of Gaza has pretty much been destroyed now. Of course, there is intensity in the north and in central Gaza and in the far south, which, if you remember, was supposed to be the safe zone for people to flee to from the north. And on the right, that combines the damage to residential areas and the destruction of agricultural, water, reservoirs, everything that is necessary for the maintenance of life in Gaza. So pretty sobering mapping there of the devastation in Gaza, which was not mentioned by Blinken in his rhetoric about a ceasefire.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you for that. Now, let's move on to defence pacts, and in this case, AUKUS. There's been quite a bit of AUKUS news recently. If you remember what AUKUS is, it's this defence pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And, well, maybe we get a clue a little bit later as to what this is really all about. So anyway, the government very, very excited that they have set up a new trade agreement, but they're saying that the United Kingdom, United States and Australia have stood shoulder to shoulder for decades to support the security and stability of the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. And AUKUS is a demonstration of our collective commitment in the region. So they announced a trade pact between them, which is going to cover up to £500 million of UK defence exports, plus billions of dollars of trade between the 3 nations in total. They're saying that this trade breakthrough comes via the publication of the UK's AUKUS Nations Open General Licence, combined with a new exemption to the US International Traffic Arms Regulations for the UK and Australia. and new national exemptions for the UK and US in Australia's export control framework. So it's all just about taking the brakes off arms controls and making sure that we can pass weapons between ourselves and so on. Anyway, they went on to say today's actions will strengthen our three countries' combined military capabilities, the pace of our collaboration and response to threat, and boost our collective industrial capacity, giving ourselves a military and strategic edge over our adversaries. That's what they claim. Now, of course, originally this was how it was all being presented, as a submarine deal, so that Australia would get hold of nuclear-powered submarines, not nuclear weapons on board, but nuclear-powered submarines. By working together, the AUKUS partnership is delivering a new fleet of submarines based on the UK's world-leading design. Well, is that true? We'll see in a second. But the other thing that they announced in the past couple of weeks was advanced military capabilities spanning artificial intelligence and autonomy. And it's the autonomy aspect of this that I think is particularly interesting. So we have a little bit of video here. It's an excerpt from a longer video clip, but let's have a look at this.
RATE, which stands for Resilient Autonomy and Artificial Intelligence Technologies, are a series of AI tools and techniques, as well as autonomy packages that are being brought together across all of the different nations.
And it's all about our ability to deploy autonomous systems, to deploy AI models and test those models on those autonomous systems and work collaboratively together under the AUKUS partnership.
At PCC4 we have UK, US and Australian assets flying together to meet common goals, supported by a core team on the ground working on AI models to detect targets, push that back into Army fires chains and support Army decision making.
And Vanessa, very briefly, I mean, we've seen how Israel is using AI to allegedly target, to target alleged insurgents or whatever they call them in Gaza. This is a bad development, I think, as we all try to catch up with that capability.
Yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder to what degree Unit 8200 is involved in this development, because yes, there's Lavender and Gospel that are systems that have been used to identify targets in Gaza and that have effectively led to the massacre of thousands on the basis that the AI is identifying them correctly, and of course they're not.
Indeed. And then we've got this undersea warfare and hypersonic capabilities is also being part of this AUKUS deal, this latest deal. Interesting that they mentioned this just at the time that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline questioning around that is in the headlines again. But the former Australian Prime Minister, Paul Keating, had this to say about what AUKUS really is. And I have to say, I find it hard to argue with his point here.
You see, we're going to get AUKUS, but not the submarines. What we're going to get is what Kurt Campbell, the Deputy Secretary of State, has said, we're going to tie these guys up for 40 years. What AUKUS is about in the American mind is turning the suckers into Australia. We're locking us up for 40 years with American bases all around. I mean, what this report today tells you, they're going to have American bases all around Australia. American bases, not Australian, but all around Australia. So AUKUS is really about, in American terms, the military control of Australia. I mean, what's happened, I say this, the Albanese government was, in their policy, is likely to turn Australia into the 51st state of the United States.
And I say, hard to argue with that, Charles. And really what he's saying, and I think the parallel might be Israel. If the United States is wanting to look towards China, which it clearly is and has been for many times, it needs a base of operations. Obviously, it's got the west coast of the United States itself, but that's quite a distance away. Australia is a little bit closer. So what was the term that was used with respect to Israel? America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East. That seems to be what Australia is becoming.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, it seems. I think Keating's absolutely right. It seems very transparent. So obviously not naive of the Australian administration now. I mean, it can't be accidental. But no, I'm certain that would be the reason for it.
Yes. Okay. Now let's come back to the UK then, and what's going on with respect to greenbelt?
Yes, quite. Well, Greenbelt is sort of yet another of the many attacks on land and land use that we're seeing up and down the United Kingdom and have done for many years, but it's become more and more acute this year. So we've got the many competing sort of aspects of food security, of what they're calling nature restoration schemes, then of course the renewable thing. And here now, updated on the 2nd of August, we've got proposed reform to the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, and other changes to the planning system. There's a lot within this, but what I want to point out is that it's this paragraph here that they want to remove from a footnote, which is: the availability of agricultural land used for food production should be considered alongside other policies in this framework when deciding what sites are most appropriate for development. So they want to remove that. Now, the consultation itself is open now and closes on the 24th of September, which you should be mindful of. Of course, you can go and view this and contribute yourself. But in effect, what they're wanting to do, or at least what they say, is that there's confusion within the existing framework and sort of additional documentation. So they say that they propose correcting that to require local planning authorities to undertake a review where an authority cannot meet its identified housing, commercial or other need without altering greenbelt boundaries. So straight away, they've jumped the very obvious hurdle, which is: where exactly is the need for housing being demonstrated, or indeed commercial property? That there's no demonstration of that with which to meet it via means of a planning policy framework. So that's the first thing to point out. But effectively, they are compelling local authorities to undertake a review, and it's very easy to see how that's then a step towards using Greenbelt. So we're calling this Greenbelt release. We propose to insert a new paragraph in the NPPF, which will make it clear that in instances where a local planning authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, or is delivering less than 75% against the delivery test, or where there is unmet commercial or other need, development on the Greenbelt will not be considered inappropriate when it's on sustainable grey belt land, where golden rules for major development are satisfied and where development would not fundamentally undermine the function of the Greenbelt across the area of the plan as a whole. I think we describe that as word soup. What on earth do they mean by it? Well, in effect, as I say, what they're trying to do is push the authorities to chuck the rule book out the window and just build on Greenbelt. But instead, the way they do it is they decide, well, they'll come up with a new term called grey belt, which of course we've referred to in the past, and they define this as such. For the purposes of plan making and decision making, grey belt is defined as land in the green belt, comprising previously developed land and any other parcels and or areas of greenbelt land that make a limited contribution to the 5 greenbelt purposes. So, of course, they could still be making contribution, but just a limited one, which therefore makes them vulnerable. We'll just look at what the greenbelt is supposed to do. 5 purposes: to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns, and to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging the recycling of derelict and other urban land. I think it's safe to say that absolutely none of those purposes or objectives are being met, and the direction of travel via planning policy, via environmental policy, and via energy policy is in absolute contravention of the purposes of the Green Belt, most readily shown by the Renewable Energy Planning Database quarterly extract. I've turned this into a graph format to make it clear how these applications have gone up and up and up in the last few years. Particularly, we consider 2020 to be the sort of the year of acceleration and limited sort of output in that time. But we've gone up through 843 in 2021, over 1,000, nearly 1,500 in 2022, up to 1,800 applications last year. And here at August now, 745, which of course are written down. So it's very obvious to see that there's just an increasing push towards this relentless destruction of the countryside, apparently in the name of the environment, sustainability, and all sorts of things that are totally disingenuous descriptions for what's actually going on. And Mike's going to talk now more about how that's being affected with energy.
Just a very brief comment, because again, 10 Downing Street pushing this out on Twitter yesterday, reminding us that we need to find out all about Great British Energy and how this is going to be great for us and what it can do for us. Well, I just thought it was funny that they were pushing this out when just the day before Cornwall Insight had been releasing their latest forecast for what the energy price cap was going to be for the final 3 months of the year, and expecting to see a 9% increase compared to July. So this, of course, is situation not improving as a result of an ever increasing building of wind turbines and so on. Now, the actual number will be published on the 27th of August, so we've got to wait until then to find out whether that forecast is anywhere correct. But this release of planning restrictions it's been happening for quite a number of years now. It's just accelerating, but it hasn't really resulted in the capability of reducing energy costs for anybody. So what is the benefit of it? It seems to be, as you pointed out, all about restricting the use of land for farming.
Absolutely, it is, yeah. And indeed, critically, people deriving pleasure from being in it, which, again, is completely overlooked by all those that should be protecting it.
Indeed. Okay, well, we've got to leave it there for today. So thank you very much to Charles and Vanessa, and for you all for joining us. We will be back in a few minutes if you're a UK Column member for some extra. Otherwise, enjoy the interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow, but we'll see you on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.